She doesn't even know what day it is, Your Honor. She can hardly put clothes on by herself. My stepmother delivered the words without a flicker of hesitation. She sat barely 3 feet from me in that courtroom, my late father's luxury watch gleaming on her wrist, the Cartier he had given her 2 Christmases earlier. And there she was, telling the judge I was mentally unfit. I didn't flinch. I didn't shed a tear. I simply folded my hands in my lap and counted in silence. 14. That was how many days remained before she lost every single thing she had taken from my family. Be honest with me. Have you ever been in a room filled with people who are supposed to love you, only to watch every one of them swallow a complete lie about who you are? Drop a comment if you know that exact pain. I want to know how many of us have lived through it, because that morning in Courtroom 4B of the Harris County Probate Court in Houston, Texas, I was surrounded by people who shared my last name, yet not one of them stood with me. My stepmother, Diane, had entered my life when I was 11. She married my father just 8 months after my mother passed away from pancreatic cancer. She arrived with fresh blonde highlights, an unused real estate license, and a smile sharp enough to skin a serpent. My father, God rest his soul, was a decent man lost in sorrow. Diane offered him a lifeline that proved to be nothing more than a chain. For 17 years, she controlled him. She cut him off from his brother, from his old college buddies, from anyone who might have spoken the truth that Diane never loved him. Diane loved his assets. She loved the spacious home in River Oaks. She loved the lakeside property in Conroe. She loved the steady dividends from the commercial real estate trust my grandfather had started from scratch back in 1974. Then, 14 months ago, my father suffered a stroke. He passed away in the ICU at Houston Methodist at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand. Diane was out in the waiting area, already on her phone, reaching out to his financial advisor. In the week following his funeral, I learned 3 key facts. First, my father had revised his will 18 months before his death. He left the house to Diane, but the trust, roughly $4.2 million in commercial holdings and investment accounts, he left entirely to me. Second, Diane had discovered this update exactly 4 months earlier. She had rummaged through his desk while he was at a heart appointment and found the draft. Third, and this one shifted everything, Diane had used those 4 months to quietly drain funds from the trust's operating account. Not massive sums at once, $5,000 here, $8,000 there. Just enough to support the lifestyle she knew was ending, but not enough to set off any automatic review. By the time my father died, she had shifted over $310,000 into hidden accounts. Most people would explode. Most would rush to hire an attorney, file papers, blast it across social media, and dial every relative they could reach. Most would lash out. And that's precisely what Diane expected. Because Diane didn't stop at stealing money. She had a full strategy. If I lost control, if I accused her wildly, if I unraveled in front of the family, she could gesture at my outburst and claim, "See? She's unstable. She's paranoid. She can't handle this fortune." She needed me to appear unhinged. That was phase 2 of the theft. First, steal the money, then destroy the credibility. Without credibility, no one listens when you say the money has vanished. It's a classic move from the Narcissist Handbook. They don't merely wound you. They arrange things so that when you speak up, you sound deranged.
So I refused to react. I did the reverse. I disappeared. I left the apartment my father had helped support and moved into an $800 a month studio in Montrose. I kept driving my 10-year-old Civic. I dressed in simple jeans and t-shirts. I said nothing about what I had uncovered. I attended the family meals. I smiled at Diane across the table. I let her pat my hand and murmur, "Your father would have wanted us to remain close, darling." And every night after the others left, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and black coffee, tracking every cent she had moved. Here's what Diane never realized about me. She saw me as a mid-level analyst at an accounting firm. Dull job, dull person, dull existence. What she didn't know was that I had spent 6 years conducting forensic audits for a company focused on fraud investigation. I had assisted the IRS in building cases against people far more cunning than Diane. My whole professional life involved chasing money through hidden paths until I reached the place where it was concealed. She wasn't robbing a grieving daughter. She was robbing a professional who did exactly this for a living. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed her to trap herself with her own actions. So I allowed her to continue taking. I monitored the transfers live. I recorded each one with exact timestamps, IP addresses, and device details. I matched the receiving accounts against corporate records in Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware. She had created 3 shell companies, always 3, the way those fraud workshops recommend. One was Bluebird Properties, LLC. Another was Golf Horizon Consulting. The third almost made me chuckle. Legacy Asset Management. She had named her theft operation Legacy. The irony was suffocating. For 5 months, I observed, gathered, and assembled a file thick enough to thrill any federal prosecutor. And I waited. Then Diane struck. She submitted an emergency petition for conservatorship, asserting I was mentally impaired and incapable of handling the trust. She presented a psychologist, Dr. Edwin Marsh, later revealed to be her boyfriend's golf partner, who filed a report written without ever meeting me. He diagnosed me with serious dissociative disorder and mental deterioration based solely on what Diane described over the phone. He had never examined me, never run any tests. He issued a clinical assessment of a stranger based only on the thief's account. And that's how I found myself in Courtroom 4B on a Wednesday morning in January, hearing my stepmother talk about me as if I were a faulty gadget that required disconnection. "She's missed payments on bills," Diane told Judge Alderman, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had already wrinkled in her bag for dramatic effect. "She forgets entire discussions. She phones me at 2 in the morning, lost about her own location. I'm genuinely frightened for her, Your Honor. I promised her father I would look after her, and I plan to honor that." Behind her, the seats were packed. My father's sister, Aunt Colette, sat with her 2 daughters. A woman I didn't recognize, later identified as Diane's stylist, was there simply to occupy space. They all nodded in agreement, as if hearing an inspiring lecture. Diane had spent months preparing them, with calls, lunches, and emotional messages about her deep concerns for me. She had transformed my relatives into spectators, and now she was delivering her greatest show. Her attorney, Curtis Hamley, wearing a suit that strained at the seams, rose and spoke to the court.
Your Honor, we seek the immediate naming of Mrs. Diane Calloway as temporary conservator over the estate of the deceased Robert Calloway, particularly the Calloway Family Trust, to stop any additional financial harm due to the respondent's inability to handle her own matters. Judge Alderman peered at me over his glasses. He was in his early 60s, gray-haired, with the weary look of someone who had heard too many lies. "Miss Calloway," he said, "these are grave claims. Your stepmother asserts you cannot care for yourself or your finances. What is your response?" The room fell still. Diane leaned in. Curtis tapped his pen. Aunt Colette held her breath. They all anticipated the collapse. They wanted sobbing. They wanted bewilderment. They wanted the fragile girl Diane had portrayed. I rose calmly. I fastened my jacket. I looked straight at Diane, not the judge, not the audience, but her. I held her eyes for 3 long seconds without looking away. In psychology, that's known as a power move. It signals, deep down, that you are unafraid. Then I faced the judge and replied, "I'm paying attention, Your Honor. I simply want to confirm my stepmother has finished speaking. I wouldn't want to cut her off while she's still sworn in." Diane's mouth twitched, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. She sensed the shift beneath her feet. She didn't understand it yet, but she felt it. Curtis recovered fast. "Your Honor, we have records, financial documents revealing a clear pattern of neglect and poor handling." He paying a folder to the bailiff. "The trust's operating account has dropped more than $310,000 over the last 11 months. Unexplained moves to unknown parties. No supervision, no proper reports. If this doesn't show incapacity, I don't know what does." Judge Alderman scanned the pages. His face stayed neutral, but his pen halted. That's a sign. When a judge stops writing, something has registered. Diane couldn't resist adding, "She doesn't even review her statements, Your Honor. I had to discover this on my own. $300,000 vanished, and she had no clue. What sort of person misplaces that kind of sum without noticing?" The gallery whispered. Aunt Colette murmured to her daughter. Heads shook. In their view, it was settled. Poor, helpless girl. Lucky Diane was stepping in to rescue everything. I let the quiet linger for 5 full seconds, giving the room time to settle into its judgment, giving Diane time to feel secure. Then I spoke. "Your Honor, may I come forward?" Judge Alderman nodded. I lifted a thick black binder from the table, nearly 200 pages, marked with colored tabs, red for financials, blue for digital traces, green for company records, yellow for lies under oath. "I didn't simply lose sight of $310,000, Your Honor," I said, setting the binder before him. "I observed every dollar depart. I know precisely where each one went, when, and who moved it." Diane's expression held steady, but her hands betrayed her. She clutched the table edge until her knuckles turned white. I opened the first red tab. "These are the confirmed wire transfers from the trust's operating account. In the past 11 months, 47 separate moves went to 3 different LLCs: Bluebird Properties, Gulf Horizon Consulting, and Legacy Asset Management." I paused and glanced at Diane. All 3 were formed in Wyoming through a registered agent. The papers name a stand-in director, but the actual owner who controls the accounts appears in the Wyoming Secretary of State's private records. Curtis shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. This falls outside—" I continued without pause. The true beneficial owner of all three shell entities is Diane Marie Calloway, my stepmother. The same woman now asking you to hand her control of the funds she has already been taking. The courtroom burst into noise. Aunt Colette gasped sharply. Gerald leaned in. Diane's stylist seemed ready to vanish. Curtis spoke, but no one heard him. "That's a lie!" Diane burst out, dropping her composed act. "She made that up. She's imagining things. This is exactly the instability I've described. She's paranoid and invents stories." Judge Alderman lifted his hand. Silence returned. He gazed at Diane with an expression I'll always remember. Not rage, not surprise, but the weary realization of a man who understood he had been turned into a tool. He turned to me. "Go on, Miss Calloway." I moved to the blue tab. "These are the IP records from each transfer. Every one came from the same device, a Dell Inspiron laptop tied to the home Wi-Fi at 1847 Willow Creek Lane. That is my stepmother's residence, the very house my father left her." Curtis tried again. "Your Honor, this material hasn't been—" I flipped to the green tab and pressed on. "Here are the statements for those three shell companies. Notice the routine. Funds arrive from the trust. Rest for 30 to 60 days. Then move onward to a personal brokerage account at Charles Schwab. That account is jointly held by Diane Calloway and a man named Trevor Fisk." I looked at Diane. "Would you prefer to explain to the judge who Trevor Fisk is, or shall I?" Diane stayed mute. Her lips parted, then shut. She resembled a fish gasping on land. "Trevor Fisk," I went on, "is a real estate broker in Galveston. He and my stepmother have been involved for roughly 3 years. It started while my father was still alive, while he recovered from his initial heart issue. In fact, I have hotel records, text messages secured through proper channels, and a lease for a beachfront condo in Galveston signed by both. A condo bought with funds taken from my father's trust." The gallery fell into a different kind of quiet, not awkward, but stunned. People were rethinking every assumption. Aunt Colette had tears in her eyes. She wasn't watching Diane anymore. She was watching me. And for the first time in more than a year, she looked truly regretful. Judge Alderman closed the binder. He took off his glasses and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Then he faced Diane and Curtis with a stare cold enough to chill the gulf. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, his tone measured. "Did you submit this conservatorship request while fully aware that you were the one directing those transfers?" Curtis seized Diane's arm. "Don't respond to that." But Diane was unraveling. "It's not how it appears," she spilled. "I was overseeing the money. Robert instructed me to. He granted me power before he passed. He wanted me to—" "He didn't," I cut in. "And I can demonstrate it." I opened the yellow tab, the section I had held back, the part that turned a civil dispute into criminal territory. "My stepmother presented a document to this court within her filing," I stated. "Page 14 of her initial petition. It's a letter allegedly from my father giving Diane wide control over the trust. It's dated 3 months before his death and carries his signature." Curtis lost all color. He knew what was next. "I had that letter reviewed by a qualified forensic document specialist," I continued. "The expert's findings are inside this binder. The signature is a digital scan. It was copied from another paper, a 2023 property tax form, and inserted into the letter with editing software. The PDF metadata reveals it was generated 4 days after my father's death, on a computer linked to Curtis Hamley's law office.
Curtis slapped the table. "This is absurd. The letter is forged," I said, addressing Judge Alderman directly. "Presented under oath in this court as support for a false conservatorship request. That goes beyond theft, Your Honor. Under Texas Penal Code Section 37.02, it constitutes aggravated perjury. And under Section 32.46, it's a first-degree felony for obtaining a document through deception where the value exceeds $300,000. Judge Alderman held Curtis in a long stare. "Mr. Hamley," he said softly, "did you create that document?" Curtis was perspiring heavily. Dark stains bloomed under his arms. He offered no reply. He didn't have to. The metadata told the story. Diane immediately turned on him. "He assured me it would stand," she snarled, jabbing a finger at Curtis. "He claimed nobody would look closely. It was his suggestion." Curtis recoiled as if struck. Their partnership shattered right there. Two schemers in a capsizing vessel, each desperate to push the other under. "I never intended any of this," Diane said, pivoting toward the gallery. Her voice broke, but the tears wouldn't come. The facade had cracked beyond repair. "Robert planned to leave me with nothing. After all I sacrificed for him, 17 years I devoted to that man. I helped raise his daughter. I maintained his home. You maintained his money," I corrected. "That's what you truly protected." Judge Alderman raised his hand once more. He drew a deep breath, then spoke with the finality of a decision already reached. "This court finds no proof of mental incapacity regarding the respondent, Miss Calloway. The petition for conservatorship is rejected with prejudice. In addition, this court is forwarding details of the forged document and the deceptive petition to the Harris County District Attorney's Office for criminal review." He looked straight at Diane. "Mrs. Calloway, I urge you to secure independent criminal representation. Mr. Hamley will likely be unable to assist you, as he now appears involved in the same matter." He paused. "And Miss Calloway, the younger one?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You noted the transfers involved several states. The shell companies in Wyoming, the brokerage here in Texas, the Galveston condo funded via interstate wires." "Yes, Your Honor." He nodded deliberately. "I will also refer this to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. It may amount to interstate wire fraud." Diane's face went utterly empty. Not furious, not terrified, simply blank. The blankness of someone who suddenly sees that the snare she built had closed around herself. I sat back down. My hands stayed steady. My pulse remained even. I felt the way one does after completing a long race, drained, yet perfectly clear, as if every step had been necessary so I could finally rest. The courtroom cleared gradually. Aunt Colette found me in the corridor. Tears streamed down her face. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "I had no idea. She told us. She said you were—" "I know what she said," I answered. I wasn't upset with Colette. I understood. Narcissists don't only manipulate their targets, they manipulate everyone watching. They construct a false world so believable that even decent people become caught inside it. "Do you warn us?" she asked.
Because I needed you to accept her story, I replied. If you had questioned her, she would have adjusted her approach. She required a complete crowd. She needed every person in that room agreeing with her. Only then would she feel bold enough to file the petition. And the petition was the one thing that placed the forgery into the official record under oath, where it becomes a serious crime. Colette stared. You orchestrated all of this? I prepared for the chance, I said. There's a difference. I stepped out into the January sunlight. Houston winters are odd. Chilly enough for a coat, mild enough to hint that spring is near. I stood on the courthouse steps and drew the deepest breath I had taken in 14 months. 3 weeks later, Diane faced indictment on 6 charges: theft from an estate, forgery, aggravated perjury, securing a document through deception, money laundering, and 1 federal count of wire fraud. Curtis Hamley received separate charges on 3 counts, including conspiracy and falsifying an official record. Trevor Fisk, the boyfriend, was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. The Topstown condo was confiscated. The boyfriend account was locked. Every cent in those Sox companies was returned to the tech. Diane beyond bail. She phoned me from an unfamiliar number. I ignored it, but something addressing the life, she said. Her tone was empty. No tears, no act, just pure venom.